Hello, everyone. This is our recorded discussion for the theories and principles that is used in designing a technology driven lesson plan. And we will to start with, we have our Dale's cone of experience discussion. We This is our learning objectives, by the way. So you will be able to explain Dale's cone of experience comprehensively and present classroom practices that exemplify each level of cone. Next is present exemplars of the different instructional tools suitable for an instructional setting. So the real question in teaching and learning process is that how useful and suitable are our learning materials is for that specific topic. Now, our cone of experience, which is created by Edgar Dale in 1946, will introduce us that different materials brings different retention levels to our students. So here, as you can see in the framework, we have first on the bottom part of this cone, we have the direct proposal experience. We have the model or simulate a real experience. This is what we call contrive experience. We have role play a situation. We have participate a hands-on workshop. We have watch demonstration. We have view exhibit. We have watch moving pictures. We have watch still pictures. We have listened to the lecture, and we have read the text. So here, as what you can also see in the framework, 90% of what our students do as they perform, they remember. 30% of what they say and write, they remember. 50% of what they see and hear, they remember. 30% of what they see only, they remember. 20% of what they hear, they remember. And it's only 10% of the retention that they will remember if they will read. So that's why it's important that we enrich ourselves with different learning materials that we can use to improve our classroom discussion. So now, this is the following interpretation of Edgar Dale's cone of experience. So we first is lower levels of the cone involve the student as participant and encourage active learning. That means to say, the lower part of that cone, if we're going to go back to that page, means to say that the student is engaged fully in their own learning. Second is pictures are remembered better than verbal propositions. So that's why it is important to have a learning materials or instructional materials when we discuss or when we deliver our topics. Next is the upper levels of the cone need more instructional support than the lower levels. So since it moves from concrete to abstract, that means to say when we use books instead of models, then it is important that we give more support compared to if we use a model. Next is abstractness increases as we go up and concreteness increases as we go down. So as I've said, from concrete to abstract, that means from the base part of the cone up until the up or the top part, and abstract to concrete is from the top down to the bottom. Higher levels compress information and provide data faster than those who can process it. So it just means that it is important to provide, again, a learning material that will provide enough information for the learner. At the same time, it should be always suitable. Now, what are these bands of experience in Dale's cone of experience? First is we have the direct purposeful experience. If you were going to go back or to check the cone again, this is the last part of or the base part of the cone. So there are experiences that have at least abstractiveness and the maximum possible concreteness. Purposeful means interaction of one intent, and those are should be meaningful. Skills we gain in real life through our first-hand direct involvement. What are the examples of this in our teaching and learning process? Uh, that would mean there are hands-on activities, like for example in baking, in what we call this home economic subjects. There is a direct purposeful experience if you let them bake compared to teaching them how to bake. Next is we have contrived experiences. So there are experiences that we cannot really do in real life. That's why we try to simulate it. When we say simulate, we try to practice it. In your case, for our program, education programs, um, there is a good example of a contrived experience that we can also relate to direct purposeful experience. For example, if you're doing demonstrations or teaching demonstrations here in the Holy Cross of Davao College, that is still contrived experience. However, if we go outside, or for example, you apply those experiences you have in the real classroom, it could be private or public schools partners of the Holy Cross, then that would be considered as direct purposeful experience. So another is that we make use of model, we make use of experiments in the laboratory. So contrived experiences examples we have first is a model. So it's a replication or a small scale of a large scale. For example, when we let our learners create their own house or miniature, for example. Next is we have a mock-up. So a good example of a mock-up is a solar system that we have in science. And we have a specimen. A specimen is it's like a real thing out of, for example, um, it's an evidence of, or it could be a piece of work, or it could be an evidence out of a real picture. For example, the brain. Okay, that could be a good example of specimen. Blood samples are also specimen. Object, on the other hand, it could be artifacts displayed in a museum or object displayed in exhibits or preserved insect specimens. So when we preserve, for example, when we have a preserved specimen, that becomes an object. But take note, the difference of these two is that um, in most cases, you cannot store specimen longer than how many months or years. However, for object, these are already displayed for quite some time. It could be in the museum or even in the laboratory. Another example of contrived experience is the simulation. So it's a representation of the real manageable event in which the learner is an active participant engaging in learning behavior or in applying previously acquired skills or knowledge. In your case, again, the teaching demonstration here in the Holy Cross of Davao College is an example of simulation. Another example of that are our Marian students uh, doing their simulation in the simulator part of our school. So, next is that's a good example, by the way. Now, next is we have going up onto the top is we have the dramatized experience. So the experience gained through active participation and role playing in dramatic activities. Okay? So what are the examples of a dramatized experience? First is we have the play. So it depicts a life, character, culture, or a combination of three. They offer excellent opportunities to portray vividly essential ideas about life. Next, we have pageants. So these are usually community dramas that are based on local history. So this is an example of on the uh, pictures. Here is an example of plays, and the lower picture is an example of pageants. Next, we have pantomime. So pantomime is a method of conveying a story by bodily gestures. So you cannot talk here. There's no what we call this verbals. It's only the what we call this body movements. That's an example. And of course, we have a tableau. A tableau is a picture-like scene, but it is composed of people against a background. So when you let your learners create a picture out of their body, uh, that means to say you we are applying a tableau type of dramatized experience. Now, next is we have the role playing. So it is an unrehearsed, unprepared, and spontaneous dramatization of a situation. So puppets are always very good to represent a figure or to represent a character. Now we make use of, so that's an example of puppets. Now there are different types of puppets, by the way. First, we have the shadow puppets. So it is a flat black silhouette made from lightweight cardboard shown behind a screen. An example of this is our Agama Phenobra, um, what we call this, presenters. Next is we have the rod puppets. As you can see in the picture, it uses rods. So it's actually a flat cut out figures tacked to a stick with one or more movable parts and are operated below the stage. Take note of that. Next is we have the glove and finger puppets. Make use of globes in which small costume figures are attached. So we make use of our fingers for this one. And we have the marionettes. Marionettes are flexible, jointed puppets operated by strings or wires attached to a crossbar and maneuvered from directly above the stage. So as you can see here. Now, the next part of our what we call this cone of experience are demonstrations. So demonstrations, it is a visual description or a significant reality concept or process. For example, if you teach them the process, you are actually demonstrating it. Students can watch how certain things are done, either in the form of actual objects or models. So for better performance, the teacher should try to involve the students in demonstration process. So there should be what we call a question and answer portion, for example, during the demonstrations. Right? For example, if you are conducting a laboratory demonstration, okay, you should let them actively involved. For example, if it's important that they cannot have the demonstration first themselves, then um, it is better to let them engage in your what we call this um, process, okay, in the teaching and learning process during that time. So another good example of this, aside from laboratories, are, for example, physical education teachers showing how to dance. For example, if you would let them watch the video on how to dance the tango before they do it themselves. Now, um, another one are the study strips. So this is a planned point vision or a location outside of a daily classroom. So this is an organized situation in the form of tours, flights, hikes, and excursions. Provide that students with valuable opportunities to offer direct real life experience. So these are examples of study trips that we can have in different what we call this uh, learning areas. For science, we can have the science field trip. For historical or Aring Palimpunan students, we can have the living history field trip. Eco adventure trip for biology, Museum of Natural History trip for social science, reward trip for celebration or fun field trip, aviation museum trip for military history trip, heritage museum trip for culture field trip, historic church trip for religious field trip. Now, next is we have exhibits. So we are now on the almost half of the cone. So brings the outside world into the classroom, employing exhibits, the concrete representation of the things The teacher can help the students by gaining useful experience through the observation and organization of educational significant exhibitions. So they may consist of meaningful organized working models or photograph or templates, maps, and posters. So we have the television or motion pictures, or we can also call it motion still, so or still pictures. So television and movies clips can so expertly recreate the history of the past, so we may have to feel like we're there. But now, however, today we don't have the tapes anymore. They only have it in a museum, or those that are fond of keeping the tapes, the old tapes. So what we have are already in a flash drives, or we also already save it in our cloud drives. So we have also here still pictures, recordings, and radio. So this stage includes the number of devices that may be classified roughly as one-dimensional aids because they use only one sense organ, and that is our eye, or it could be our ear. So just like what you're doing now, this is actually what I call still pictures or recording radio. So next is we have the visual symbols. So there are no longer practical reproductions of materials, for such representations are incredibly abstract. So visible concepts that describe something intangible by association and something that reflects or stands for something else. So let's have a good examples of this. We have first is we have drawings. So if you ask for example, if we present our discussion through drawings, for example, colors, or could be in a sentence format, and we draw what is a sentence, what the sentence would like to imply, and we make use of drawings. Now, it's important that whatever is in the drawing should reflect what is in the real thing. Okay, so it should we should prevent ambiguity. So it's not just what we mean is a flower. However, we can when the what we call this learner would check, it's not a flower for her. So we should avoid ambiguity. Cartoons. So if we upgrade somehow our drawings, we can create it in a more animated way. So that's a good example of a visual symbols. Another good example of visual symbols are strip drawings. Okay, so just this is like what we call this in the comics. So it is a series of adjacent, typically horizontal, organized images with narrative or sequential events. Another are diagrams. So another type of visual symbols are diagrams, and we have lot of types of or a lot of examples of diagrams. First is we have affinity. So if we want to cluster our numerous ideas, we can have affinity diagram. For example, if we have a word cloud and we want to like we would ask our students to our learners rather to group them or categorize them, so we can have affinity diagram title. Next, a type of diagram is we have the tree diagram. So take note, could be used for process, or it could also be used for what we call this, what comes first and then what comes next. So that's what a process type of concept. And then we have the fishbone. Fishbone is a cause and effect type of diagram. So we can make use of that as an example, as a visual symbol. And next we have the charts. So charts are actually a good example of how we summarize and how we present data in a more diagrammatic way. So we have the chart, the time chart, by the way. So basically it's just time with a date, and we have the tree or stream chart. So this idea is whoever comes first, and then we have the flow chart. So it's also another type of process diagram, and we have the organizational chart. So yes, that's it. And we have compare and contrast chart. So that's a good example. So it's like, for example, you have two concepts that you would like to compare and contrast. This is similar to Venn diagram, but somehow um, a more detailed one. And we have Pareto chart. So Pareto chart is actually a graph, but somehow it is still considered Pareto chart because it gives us who on the frequency from left to right, it gives us who is the highest, who is the lowest. It's not the same with bar chart, because when we say bar chart, it's just randomly pick what uh, whether which location it is on the x or y axis. But somehow with Pareto chart we have to what we call this, have it from highest to lowest. So this one is another example of chart, which is, we call it Gantt chart. So basically it explains the accomplishment you have done for such specific task. Okay, and we have the visual symbol for graph. So we have bar graph. Bar graph is not, again, different from Pareto chart, because Pareto is arranged from left to right in decreasing order, and bar graph is just like, it's just randomly chosen. For example, let this one randomly pick here that we have the apple, then we have the blueberry, then we have the kiwi fruit. So we don't have to arrange them, and that's just bar graph. Now we also have, of course, we have circle graph, and we have pictograph. So pictograph, instead of using bars or percentage in a circle, we make use of the pictures that is involved. Now, another example of visual symbols are graphic organizers. So this is where we use different, for example, the compare and contrast, the Venn diagram. So this is also an example of graphic organizer. Now we have maps. So it's a reflection of Earth's surface on a part thereof. So we have physical maps, by the way, and we have the relief maps. So what's the difference between the two is that relief is more of a 3D type of map, and we have the political map. So political map brings us what's the boundary between city from another city. It's also called geographical map, but it's more of political because the provinces, for example, of that country is also um, presented. We have another type of visual symbols. We have poster. So it's a large printed picture, photograph or notice that you have stick or pin to a wall or board, usually for decoration or advertised something. So this one is a good example. So a slogan could be example of poster, so long that it calls for something or it have to advertise for something, just like what you can see here. So you have to wash hands, for example. And the last is we have verbal symbols. So this is now on the top of the cone. So they're like the artifacts or the concepts they stand for. They do not generally contain visual references or to their meaning. Verbal representations are words, phrases, sounds, or other utterances spoken aloud to express a meaning. So, example, the way I discussed today, these are all example of verbal symbols. So, but I accompanied it with recordings, which is the number 8 in our cone. So now this is the sample activities with modality and percentage of how much our learners will remember, right? So it's always better to have a simulation or a model of experience so that they can, or a performance based type of activity, so that they can remember it 90% of the time. But however, there are times, there are what we call this lessons that we have or competencies that we have that we cannot allow simulation. So that's why it is your technology, pedagogy, and content base that in which you will learn how to um, pick a certain material that would fit to your competency. And this is now the significant modes of learning that we have. This is according also to, aside from the Edgar Dale contribution, it's also according to Jerome Bruner. Jerome Bruner is the famous for um, learning by doing, together with John Dewey. So here we have three modes of learning. The real thing happens in an active pictures, films, sculptures, or somehow dolls. It happens in iconic, and language and math, it happens in symbolic. So inactive or direct contact includes working with the objects. So there is where simulations and contrived experiences occurs. Iconic learning includes reading photos and sketches. The students look at paintings, pictures, and movies to learn how to tie knots. Iconic perception is separated from the world of science and limited or three of two senses rather. So it could be through ears or through eyes only. Symbolic, this is highly abstract. That's the reason why math and language are what we call this. Sometimes our learners had a hard time understanding because they are very abstract. So to the point that um, sometimes we have a difficulty of presenting conceptualized examples. So yeah, but the challenge is we make use of the learning materials based on the code of experience by Edgar Dale, depending on the competency that we have. And that would be it for our lesson one. Thank you so much for listening.